Hi, I'm Danny Ramos, and welcome to this week's edition of Hispanic Speak Out TV, brought to you every week on Spectrum Cable statewide. And we're here with attorney Sandra Rivera, who's a co-host every single week on this show, and she gives us some legal perspectives, because I'm not a lawyer. So it's good that we have lawyers coming to the show all the time. How you doing?
Good, good.
Okay, so Supreme Court.
Yes.
All right, so what's going on with the Supreme Court? I mean, I know that as soon as Trump got elected, the Democrats had a heart attack because they knew what was coming.
Sure. I mean, he had the potential to pick 2, if not 3, new Supreme Court candidates just based on the age of the existing bench right now. So that's what we're seeing. We're on number 2.
So this was not only a loss, a devastating loss for the philosophies of the Democratic Party, even though it's supposed to be, the Supreme Court is supposed to interpret existing law and not create opinion from the law that's written.
Right, but your interpretation is going to be guided a lot by your own principles. I mean, that's why we have a conservative side of the bench and a liberal side of the bench. So
is that supposed to be that way? I mean, isn't it supposed to be, this is what this sentence means, and not interpret it or stretch the words or interject some other thoughts?
Well, I mean, that's what interpretation is based on how you view the language of the statutes or the language of the law. And I mean, if you're leaving it to human beings and subjecting that to interpretation, it's going to.
So let's look at Roe versus the abortion thing. Okay. Well, that had no play with the Supreme Court back in the 1800s or the 1700s or the early 1900s. That's more current now.
Sure.
So what's going on right now is that the interpretation of the law is being directed based upon political party or the perception of that, right?
Right.
Because what's happening is the Democrats are coming over and they're saying, well, they're going to take back the abortion law, and they're going to, it's going to cause deaths and all this kind of stuff. And the Republicans are saying, not true. What might happen, it won't be revoked, but what might happen is that the states will have more authority in determining their own destiny.
Right, and I agree to a certain extent. What happens is you have this this precedent with the Supreme Court with Roe v. Wade and their ruling, which I believe is probably about 4 decades old now. So it's not so much that you bring in new appointees and they're going to completely overturn Supreme Court's earlier decision. What's going to happen is the states are, because they are able to manage the conditions under which you can get an abortion or the access that they give their constituents to abortion, that is how it could potentially be worked over. So not that Roe v. Wade will necessarily be outlawed, but that because the states now have the power and have had the power to place limits on it, access, what conditions, what requirements have to be met before you can get one. They're essentially building a breeding ground for a potential fight in the Supreme Court. So if they're going to be enacting a law that's going to curb or limit access, then that could potentially end up in front of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's going to have to decide, is this limitation, is this expansion constitutional?
Okay. And that because there'll be a dominant conservative, because it's not supposed to be party related, even though it is. It is party related and it's party policy. But if it's a conservative court, which is what's happening.
Correct.
Because this one is going to tilt the whole seesaw.
It is. I mean, it was already mostly conservative, but what everybody, what you read now is that Justice Kennedy, who's the one that's retiring, very often was the tilt. He was considered conservative, but from time to time, depending on the case, he could lean liberal, and he was that deciding vote. Now we have somebody who is declared conservative. Now that shift is definitely more, you can see that shift more, towards the conservative.
So conservatives are going to dominate the court.
Sure.
That's going to last for the next 30 years, which will determine the destiny of the United States as far as the legal issues.
Right. Well, and a lot of it will come to how conservative it becomes depends on whether the remaining justices, if anybody retires, if anybody passes away. I mean, we have they are getting older, and they're getting to that age where that is a very real possibility. So, I mean, the potential for Trump to be able to appoint multiple justices is, it's
well, he's got one.
Right now.
This is 2.
This is 2.
And there's a possibility of 3.
Absolutely.
If he gets reelected, there is a high possibility of 3.
Right, right. And then, I mean, the shift to a conservative bench would just be astronomical.
Yeah, yeah. It will definitely dominate the history of the United States, the interpretation of the Constitution going forward for a long, long time. How do you think that would affect minorities? I mean,
I mean, when you look at abortion right now, the limitations, depending on what state you're in, those limitations are often financial in nature, you know, or implicate financial situations. So if you've got a state where there is a law that, you know, you can only have abortion clinics in a certain area, or you have to travel a great distance, or some people have to travel twice to the abortion clinic before they can get it because of a waiting period. So when you're talking about the minority where historically they may be at a disadvantage financially, their access to abortions could be severely limited because of that, you know, whatever the financial situation is. And then, you know, you've got the arguments that if you have children that are born that the parents didn't want them to be born, now you've put them in a situation in a single family home or in a home that didn't want them, and that creates an environment of crime and dysfunction, and then that leads to an increased crime rate. I mean, there's that argument that when Roe v. Wade went down, the crime rate plummeted, went down. So, you know, you have those connections that people try and make, but when you're looking at...
Is that actually documented?
The reduction in crime rate?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, there was a reduction in crime. Now...
But could it be directly associated with abortions?
I don't think it's the major cause. I mean,
no, I'm just saying, is there any
think
correlation at all?
I can see the correlation. I mean, I've not done any of my own independent study on it, but I can see the correlation. I guess you'd have to look at the demographics of who was getting the abortions at those times. Was it mainly people who came from single-family homes, broken homes, the disadvantaged, the poorer population? You know, when you have the poorer population having abortions, obviously, you know, you're comparing that to a population of people who maybe have family support, have more money, and may not need to have the abortion. You know, their reasons may not be financial in nature. So when you put all of those factors together, sure, I could see where the argument is made that it might lead to a reduction in crime because you don't have people who have survived and are living in a dysfunctional environment. Obviously, it's assuming that they are going to live in a dysfunctional environment.
Okay. What do you think? How do you think Trump is doing? Let me throw that one out. He's been there for over a year, right? He's going into his second year, right?
Right.
So, you know, he's still getting attacked constantly. Do you believe that's personality attacks, or do you believe it's policy? Because he's doing things.
I think it's both, but I think that applies to any presidency. I mean, you know, we saw that in every presidency. The attacks, some were political in nature, some were personal, some were based on policy, some were based on just differing viewpoints. So I think because of the personality that he is, who he is, I mean, he's so unconventional, I think it makes him more open to that kind of criticism and open to that kind of, you know, you either love him or you hate him kind of mentality. So, but, you know, the other issue is he's got, you know, these criminal issues kind of lingering over him and lingering over people who were in his administration or in his campaign. So, you know, that makes him a target as well. And a lot of that is being questioned right now, especially with the appointee of the
judge.
Justice. Yep.
He's supposed to have a clean bill of health. I mean, they would, if they would have, and you know, one of the things that we saw was that the Democrats had posters made up, right? And they left the poster blank with the name of the person, of the judge. You know what I mean?
Right.
So they made the posters objecting to a judge that wasn't selected yet, and they were going to write in the name. So regardless of who, regardless who got in or was selected by Trump, they were ready to write in any name.
Right.
It was just objecting to the process, I guess.
And I'm sure they've made it their mission to, during the confirmation hearings, to do whatever in their power they can to...
Well, what are they going to do? I mean, the guy is going to, you know...
Well, when you have somebody who is obviously being appointed by a conservative presidency, you know, they're going to question, they're going to jump on the fact that he's been involved in all of these monumental decisions. He was involved with the Bush presidency. So you've got somebody who we know where his viewpoints lie. We know where his positions lie. And when you take those cases like Roe v. Wade that are really hot button topics, you know, they're going to pounce on
will
it.
The Democrats are not going to be able to stop it.
Right.
They're not going to be able to stop this process from going through and the appointment. I mean, they're going to make it a nightmare, but they cannot stop it. There is an opening.
Sure.
The president
It
gets
has
to
to be
select,
filled.
and it has to be filled.
Right.
And it has to. Obviously, Trump is not going to go in there and say, "Okay, give me a liberal Democrat, and I'll put him in."
Exactly.
The selection is already there.
Right.
So they're going to have to find something really, really egregious against this guy.
Right. And you know, I don't know what that is. I mean, everything that I've read, he's pretty well respected in the judiciary. He's got a great record in terms of being on the bench. You know, he clerked for Justice Kennedy. So yeah, I'm not sure what they're going to find, if they're going to find anything. But you know, I guess we'll just have to wait and see what we learn about him. So.
All right. Listen, she's a lawyer. Okay. If you need a lawyer, her name is Sandra Rivera. Why don't you tell them what you do?
I practice in criminal defense, and that includes juveniles, traffic, all kinds of things, and landlord-tenant law. So, which has been very busy this year.
Yeah.
So,
also, her telephone number.
407-375-2085.
Okay. So this is Danny Ramos, and we're going to take a break, and we're going to be talking about human trafficking.
Esto es amor de verdad, nadie lo puede dudar.
Step up to craft beer. Taino Light Lager has a crisp, refreshing Caribbean-style flavor. Boricua Craft Ale, full-bodied flavor for the true beer drinker. Stop drinking beer water. Taino Craft Light Lager and Boricua Strong Craft Ale. Feel the rhythm and come up to craft beer.
Thank you, Savannah. Lindsay, let's talk about your present life as a survivor and as a kick-ass Wonder Woman warrior. What services or programs do you think would make a difference for both the survivor warriors and their families? And how can communities make a difference?
The program that I have basically is based upon something that helped me, and that was sewing. Therapy does not always work for people, and that's something that I think is important to understand when talking with a survivor or survivor warrior, is when you tell them, or just go talk to a counselor, this is a lifelong trauma that we have to live with. It's ever ongoing. And so to be able to facilitate something that allows them the ability to be able to process, or when they know that a trigger is coming or something is happening, that they have something in place. 40% of the people that get out of human trafficking actually end up back in that lifestyle because they don't have something like that. So I feel it's very important to be able to provide services that are something that are ever present, ongoing, a skill or a task that they can learn and take with them, because they also come out of it with very little skills. When they go in as children, their brain becomes rewired. Basic functions and skills that, you know, normal people know how to do, we were lacking. And so we need to be able to teach them those basic skills, basic life skills. So I would have to say anything that can allow them to learn how to function in the real world again, similar to what I do with the sewing, something that they can use as a therapeutic way. Art therapy is a huge thing they use for PTSD. And yeah, just really anything that helps them to regain their dignity as a person.
Thank you for that. Collectively, we are a strong, powerful voice that can disrupt this evil, evil crime. So thank you, ladies, for your courage to share and help us get educated on the reality of human trafficking that does affect everyone. Now that we know the facts and we're clear on the current legislation and this matters to us and our communities, let's touch on how people can get involved. So first, let's talk about upcoming legislation and why it's important. Ladies, Can each of you offer your points of view, including labor trafficking and fair trade?
Me first?
Yes, you, Ross.
Okay, all right.
Go, Ross,
Ladies
go.
and gentlemen.
And gentlemen, and Ross.
And Ross.
My hearing is going, so I didn't hear you too clearly. But so one thing I would say, just to touch on what's been offered up already, from a legislative standpoint, on how people can get engaged and get involved. I think we saw in a big way how people can get involved, ordinary people can get engaged just this last legislative session. We had a bill that was stone cold dead, in one chamber. And because of the absolute insistence and just zealous advocacy of people and the insistence, that one body take up the bill and move it and get it through the process. And then at one point when it was dead, create a media kind of frenzy and uproar about the fact that it had been killed and kind of revived the bill and got it to the Senate floor. That's the kind of thing that we can do. I mean, I think sometimes we feel like, and before I was even engaged in the political process, a few years ago, I felt like, well, I can't. No, nothing I do matters. I mean, they're going to do what they're going to do, and it doesn't matter what I say. But that's not true. It's not true at all. So be engaged, get active, get with a group, that's making a difference. Get to know your legislator, right? It's important that you get to know your legislator, your senator, your local House member, before something like this comes up, right? Because if they know you and they're willing to meet with you, first of all, if you say, hey, look, I want to come in and talk with you, take 15 minutes of your time, talk to you about how this issue is really important to me, I'm passionate about this, develop a relationship with them, and then when something hits the fan at some point down the road, you have already established that relationship with them, and when you call, it makes a difference. So I would say, get involved in the legislative process. That's something that we can absolutely do. And in terms of, I think, what legislation we can now push forward, and how you can be involved in that, I think the legislation I mentioned earlier, which creates a civil cause of action, I think that will go probably farther toward really helping victims and limiting, how victims are now being used in trafficking schemes than anything else that we could possibly do. Because it's going to force the eyes and ears who are in these situations, in these hotels, in these restaurants where people are taken all the time. It's going to force those eyes and ears to be engaged. So that bill has to pass. I think, let's kind of move forward with the momentum that we created this year, and let's get that bill passed in the upcoming years. In terms of the labor trafficking issue, I will be the first to acknowledge that we haven't done enough on the labor trafficking side. I will say that the increases in penalties as it relates to traffickers, those all apply to labor trafficking, not just sex trafficking, right? So all those penalties, a life felony, but in terms of our focus from a legislative standpoint, we need to do more. We really do need to do more. And I think maybe just from a practical standpoint, and I'm not saying this is right, okay, but the perception is that when someone's being used and forced to engage in sex, that there's more urgency to that issue than someone that's being used with respect to labor. It's not right? Both should be equally important. We should be engaged on both. But I think that's why you've had the level of attention given to the sex trafficking. But obviously we need to move forward on that issue as well.
Right, Lisa?
And along with the labor trafficking, I think there's two pieces of it. There's the labor trafficking that is occurring here, and like Representative Spano said, we can certainly do some legislation to address those issues. But there's also a component that comes from abroad and affects us here. And there's currently some ongoing lawsuits in this country, nationwide, about major corporations that have human trafficking in their supply chains. And so what ends up happening is that we are a culture of deals. Everyone loves to go to the store and get a great sale. I love a good coupon myself. But there certainly is something to be said for why is the price so much cheaper for the same good in this store as opposed to another store? Why is it the other stores just greedy and they want to make more money and raise their prices? Or did something get sacrificed along the way to make this product so cheap? And what you can do, if you want to be an informed consumer, if you want to go out there and you want to make sure that you know what's going on, there on the Department of Labor website, you can go on there, look up by good or by country, and see if a product was manufactured by child labor or by forced labor. And I would love to see some legislation happen nationally to start making there be penalties for those corporations and entities that benefit from child labor and from forced labor around the world and make an extra profit here in the United States on the backs of those that are exploited. So that would be my contribution to future legislation. I'd love to see that move in that direction.
Savannah.
You messed it up. Are we still talking about how the community can get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. We're actually talking about two legislation, right? Because if you remember, like, just so you're clear, we all took 4 to 5 trips up to Tallahassee in January. And you were on most of them, so, yeah.
Okay, so before January, I didn't know anything about legislature or politics, and I hated it. And when Jan told us about the bill that we tried to get passed this session with the hotel, holding hotels and restaurants accountable, like, my first thought was, I'm not going to take off work to go because no matter what I say, it's not going to make a difference. But I ended up going because Lindsay insisted that I go. And it was amazing to see how the concerns that they talked about why it may not be a good idea, but then after we spoke and shared our stories, like, everybody voted for it. And it was because we went and shared our experiences and showed them that it's real and that it's happening. And like the bill last year, I don't think it even made it past the first session, right?
Well, in the House it did, but in the Senate it never saw one committee.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it passed the first Senate committee and the House committee this year. But then also while we were there, everything with Parkland was happening, and like you would see everything stop because the kids were all there and so many people were there. So if people could do that for human trafficking and be a voice, things would change.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So from what I know and understand, advocacy plays a huge part in all of this, Thomas. Why is it important, and what role can each of us play?
Yeah, so as you heard, this is incredible. And I just have to say, this group right here made history in our state. Representative Spano is the one who put out the House Bill 167 to initiate it. And then this group was the one traveling to Tallahassee and just really set a firestorm in a good way across our state. I mean, there was hundreds, if not thousands, of calls and emails. And, we let everyone know, and all our friends and the wonderful stakeholders, we're really set on fire by this group right here, these warriors. So can we give them a hand this evening? So we can make a difference. And I'm just going to share 2 things real quick on how all of us can make a difference. And I love how practical we're being this evening. The first one is Awareness Day, which again many of you have been to in January. Well, that started, I thought, well, we need to do something awareness. So this was almost, it'll be 11 years this January. I went to Lake Eola. We made homemade signs, and Sigma Chi fraternity called, they needed some community hours. I said, well, this is perfect. So go meet me in Lake Eola. So we met. We didn't know we had to have a permit or you had to do anything to march and assemble and whatever. So as the Orlando Police Department arrived, we were going to be escorted, and the officer was a Sigma Chi alumni, so he marched with us. And that was the first one that we did. And it was just a bunch of us, college students, and me, that started that, and what a difference now. Now, tens of thousands of people in these past 10 years have been through the Awareness Day. In fact, 2 years ago, we said we need to include the arts and film. And so I said, Jan, as she's used to me saying, I think we should do something.
Okay.
And so she said yes, and now we're going to be a hub for the International Human Trafficking Film Festival. And it's already, one part of the history is Representative Spano, the Florida Department of Education, is joining us. We're doing a student contest this fall. All the school districts in Florida will be invited to be a part of it, to make a PSA and possibly some other categories. And now we have the whole state involved in our Awareness Day for the 11th annual, this coming January. And so just a couple of people, look at the ripple effect that it made. My second example, real quick, is for many years I've been involved in seeing where do victims go at 3 in the morning on a Saturday, on 3 in the afternoon on Sunday. It's not convenient with our schedules, right, and our 9 to 5 Monday through Friday office hours. And so as I began to go on rides with our Metropolitan Bureau of Investigation, our vice unit here in Orlando in 2007, just really knew there was a huge gap. Where do we put these individuals? And so after many years of advocating, tonight we have the honor of having Commissioner Pete Clark also with us from Orange County. And I went to Commissioner and said, we need to do something, and he did. He initiated it in our county commission. Mayor Jacobs and the other commissioners agreed unanimously. We have the first government funded a short-term shelter for those women at 3 in the morning or at 3 in the afternoon on Sunday. And so, again, just an advocacy of one person can make a difference. You can make a difference. Let your voice be heard.
Thank you so much for that. We will be transitioning into a break, a real quick break soon. I do have 3 questions before we go there. Lindsay, as a survivor warrior, can you share with us, from your point of view, the significance of advocacy for victims, along with the support needed for survivors of this crime in our communities?
Well, the definition of an advocate is a person who publicly supports or recommends a particular cause or policy. We can believe it behind closed doors, but until we actually raise our voices loud enough and step outside our front door and say enough is enough, you're just another person that is listening to our story. Being an advocate, I think, has taken on a completely different definition for Tina and Savannah and myself, because we have 2 sides of that. We've lived it, but we no longer want to be silent to that, because we know just how traumatic it is to have to quietly sit with that, and having no idea, is this normal? Are these thoughts actually normal? Is this, like, am I the only person going through that? And so it's been important enough to us to actually come together to, you guys have heard the term, or us saying that we're survivor warriors. It's because we're no longer survivors. We've fought that battle, and now we're willing to stand up and advocate for others. So we're creating what's called the Warrior Coalition, which is a support group for other survivors to be able to come and no longer feel like you're alone, that you do have a voice, that your thoughts are not crazy. As someone in the community, you need to be able to be willing to kind of take the hurtful words, because there are going to be people that are going to fight you on it. There's always a battle in everything. You need to relinquish that fear, because for as afraid as you are for standing up, there are people that are afraid if they're going to wake up tomorrow, or if they're going to survive through their detox, or if they're going to see another sunrise or sunset. You have to be that person who will publicly take that stand along with us as we go into this fight, and just stand for that one.